Today on an all-new Dr. Phil.
Viewers have had so many questions
about addiction issues.
Then put your immune system at a huge compromised state, which is going to then open you up to COVID.
Anxiety.
It's a great opportunity for a parent to teach their kid, this is how we get through a crisis.
Panic attacks, marital struggles, and more.
Nerves are stretched thin. That's not the time to make a life decision.
Your COVID-19 questions answered.
Since the coronavirus quarantine, viewers have had so many questions, and they've had to do with everything from panic attacks and different kinds of mental illness inside the home to drugs, withdrawal from drugs, use of drugs, family crises, rebellion from teens, marital discord, alcoholics struggling within this quarantine with too much time and too much pressure. What could possibly go wrong there? Foster children being caught and dropped through the cracks of the system, essential workers having to deal with the anxiety of being forced to go to work and put themselves in harm's way by being exposed. All of these things, just mounting pressure on everybody. So I decided that I just needed to call timeout and answer a lot of the questions that so many of you are sending in. So what I've done is I've chosen those that represent what I've gotten lots of different people asking. And to get some help, I've invited a couple of really good friends and colleagues. So please welcome Dr. Charles Sophie. He is a board-certified psychiatrist and medical director of the County of Los Angeles Department of Child and Family Services. He is board-certified in multiple specializations, particularly psychiatry and family practice. So he has a broad lane and can help us there. I'd also like to introduce Coach Mike Baird. Now, Coach Mike is a life coach. He's CEO of Cass Centers. His New York Times best-selling book is called Best Self, Be You Only Better. And I consider him the best at helping people maximize their true potential. It's good to see you both. I haven't seen your faces for a good while. Let's jump right into the questions. Lords from New York City asked this question. My daughter lives in a women's shelter in New York City. She is addicted to heroin, like many of the girls there. The shelter has obviously been put under quarantine, and I'm concerned about my daughter going into withdrawal while locked down. Should I be more afraid of her contracting COVID-19 or dying of heroin withdrawal? Dr. Sophie, let me start with you. Let's talk about the medical aspects of this because there are complications from both.
Yes.
She says, what should she be most concerned about, as though we have to choose, and that's either COVID-19 or the withdrawal from heroin.
Right.
Prioritize, of course.
I would hope that there was some access to medical care for anybody in that shelter, even if it's 911, to be able to deal with the withdrawal from the heroin, because that's going to be the one that's going to present itself the most and the quickest and the most fast. Because once she doesn't have a dose, she misses 1 or 2 doses, she'll go really into a heavy detox.
All right, well, let me ask you this so we can cover it for everybody at home. What are the drugs that people are taking the most now? Heroin, these opioids, anything else that if they go cold turkey on their own because they're isolated, it could create major medical problems. Certainly, heroin is one, of course.
Yes, heroin, all the opioids, any of the cocaine derivatives, Molly, those kinds of things that people might have been doing on a regular basis. They got them on the street. Now they don't have access, and they're going to go through withdrawal. Their cardiovascular systems are going to suffer. Their brains obviously are going to suffer. But it also, remember, then put your immune system at a huge compromised state, which is going to then open you up to COVID.
Okay, so when you're talking about these drugs, and I'm talking about going cold turkey, it's that let's say they're quarantined so they don't have access to their source if they were getting them off the street. And so just with an absence of access, they start going into withdrawal. And what are the first symptoms you're likely to see if a family member is going into withdrawal?
And that's a great question, because it's going to be very confusing between that and are they having the beginnings of COVID? Because it feels and looks like the flu. You get a fever, you feel achy, you may have vomiting or nausea, diarrhea, sweats. So it's going to be very difficult to tell the difference. But nonetheless, it's going to mimic it very well. And it's probably, hopefully not both going on, but at least one of those is going to be going on.
Okay, so the message we need to have for people that are doing drugs, whether they've been honest with their family or not, if they start having these symptoms and they haven't been having access to their drug supply, they need to be transparent and say, look, guys, I don't want to get into this now. We can talk about the morality of this later. We can talk about your judgments of it later. But I think I'm going into withdrawal here. And if it's COVID-19, 85% of the time I'm going to ride this out. If this is withdrawal, I could die. So I'm telling you straight up, they need to be transparent about this, right?
Yeah, yes. And they need to get access medical care quickly because they could really go down quickly, especially the higher doses of the drugs, the longer and the quicker they'll go down.
All right. Coach Mike, what do you say to these addicts that have been dependent on these drugs to encourage them to be transparent and just flat put it out there and say, look, I don't want to, I hate to introduce this now. If you've known I'm on drugs or maybe you haven't, but I need to be straight up with you here. I'm addicted and this could be withdrawal. And that's much more serious to my immediate health, much more serious threat to my immediate health than COVID-19. What do you say to those addicts to get them to be honest?
Well, first, I just want to say I'm so appreciative of you bringing mental health into the conversation because right now everyone's afraid of COVID-19, but you're so right. There's so many mental health and addictive issues that are going on right now. The good news is solutions are really quick. So if someone went to doctors on demand, they literally, before you had to drag someone to an office to get an assessment, now you can literally knock on someone's door, say, I have a doctor on the phone, we're doing an assessment, and you're going to talk to him right now. And so there's a lot of solutions in terms of getting people help that otherwise we're just not going to doctor's offices. But absolutely someone needs to get on the right medication protocol. Otherwise, it's going to be another crisis.
Yeah, so this isn't about white knuckling. It's not about being tough. It's not about saying, I'm going to gut it out and get through this. Because you can go into seizure, you can absolutely shut down and have brain problems here, and it can cost you your life if you're just trying to hide this from your family. They need to be transparent, right, Coach?
Yeah, they need to be transparent and also not use this moment as an excuse so that parents don't say, well, it's so stressful in the world today, it's okay for me not to confront you about what's going on in your life, where in reality, now's the time to actually make that shift.
Okay, well, I wanted to bring this up because we know that we have an opioid epidemic in our country right now. And so shutting people off from their supply, this is going to be a frequent occurrence during this isolation period. So I'm just wanting to bring that to everybody's forefront. Now, coming up, panic attacks are on the rise as well because everybody's afraid of this. I'm going to answer your questions about what the signs and symptoms are and what to do if one of these panic attacks hit. We're going to talk about how to spot it, what to do, all of that right after the break. We are a month into our quarantine, and your questions keep on coming, which is why I've called in some colleagues to help me answer them all. Now, the next question that I want to deal with comes from Megan. And she asked, how can we keep our kids from absorbing our anxiety through this crisis and still maintain a normal kind of environment for them as well as for ourselves? And that's a really good question, Megan. And I want to broaden that even a little bit more to just talk about anxiety in general, because in my definition of anxiety is a fear response, an arousal fear response that is disproportionate to the risk. So look, if I throw a rattlesnake up on the table and you have a fear response, that's not anxiety, that's fear. It's proportionate. There is a clear and present danger, so naturally you're going to have a fear response. What happens is if I put a rubber snake up on the table and you run through a plate glass window to get away from it, that's disproportionate. And what I'm concerned about here is so much of what I'm seeing in terms of emotional response to this COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic that we're facing is disproportionate to the risk involved. 85% of the people that contract this infection are going to have mild to moderate symptoms and then get over it and go back to their lives. Dr. Sophie, talk about this for a minute in terms of the anxiety. What do people need to do to put this into perspective?
Well, I think the first thing they need to really understand is the anxiety is coming because they feel there's something they can't control. And they're right, they can't control this, but they can control what's going on in their own home. So limit your exposure to hearing all this news and all of that kind of stuff that stirs people up. Make sure you're doing the self-awareness that you need to do. Otherwise, you are going to have it flood and then go right on down to your children. And being able to really be calm, have a structure, and be self-aware. That's the key, because we're never going to control this, but you can control your environment around you.
Putting it into perspective is not trivializing it, right? I mean, to put this into perspective where you tell your kids, look, be calm. I want to reassure you here. Let's talk about what the facts are and not the sensationalism. That's not trivializing it. It's just being realistic.
I mean, if someone is going to be positive for COVID and have it, they're not going to have a cough and then the next hour be on a ventilator. There's a process to this disease. So, letting your children and yourself be aware that if the minute you have a feeling or a symptom, you'll jump on it, that gives you the feeling that you have some control.
Right. And we do have control. Coach Mike, from a behavioral standpoint, we have control over this in terms of our conduct. We can maintain everything from hand washing to social distancing to respecting the need to wipe down surfaces. We can behave our way to health on this. We're not helpless, correct?
We're not helpless, and it's also such an opportunity for someone to teach their child how to get through a difficult time, how to be resilient, how to push through. And part of that behavior is not engaging in conversations that create a lot of anxiety, from being on the telephone and talking to friends to consuming too much news. It's like junk food. After a while, you just start to feel it. And I look at this as just a great opportunity for a parent to teach their kid, this is how we get through a crisis. This is how we become resilient. And it takes effort.
Well, it really does. And, I always hear people say, speak to your children about things in age-appropriate manners, but they never define what that means. So let me define that, at least from my point of view. If you want to talk to your children in an age-appropriate manner, here's the way to determine what that is. Ask them first what they know and what they want to know. Don't go in assuming that they understand A, B, and C, because they may not. Ask them, tell me what you understand about what's going on right now. Do you know what pandemic means? Do you know what COVID-19 is? Do you understand what's happening in the hospital? Tell me what you understand. And they will tell you their level of comprehension, and you meet them where they are. You don't ask them to meet you where you are. Don't talk to them in adult terms if they're representing this to themselves in adolescent terms. Meet them where they are and talk to them in that way. Coming up, Margaret says that being isolated with her husband has made her realize how much she doesn't like him. So what should she do? Well, we'll wade into that briar patch right after the break. I'm answering all your questions about how to deal with your mental health during the coronavirus crisis. Now, to help me do that, I've invited board-certified psychiatrist Dr. Charles Sophie and life coach Mike Baer. Now, Margaret from Maine asked, I realize I don't like my husband. I have felt this way for a while, but self-isolation is actually making me hate him. Should I leave him now or wait until this is over? Well, I guess I'll start with that one, and then I'll let you guys add in. Now, I don't think the time to make a decision about a marriage, particularly one if you've been in it for a good while, is during a crisis, because that magnifies everything. I think you're a lot better off to say, okay, look, this is maybe brought into sharp relief what our issues are, but Is this the time to pull the trigger on that? If it is, why didn't you pull the trigger before this? If it was so bad, why didn't you do it before? You said, well, because I wasn't with him all the time. This just magnified it. Well, you won't be with him all the time again. Maybe there's something to do, but it's not the time to do it when nerves are stretched thin and you're in each other's face and under each other's foot. That's not the time to make a life decision. You're better off to wait until you're kind of into smooth ground, as long as neither one of you is in danger. Dr. Sophie, what would you add to that?
I would also explain to her that since she's used the word hate, that she hates him, that she should figure out what the opposite of love is, which is not hate, it's neutrality. So she's still pretty angry and has a lot of feelings for him. So I think she should work those things out first, because she's not ready to go.
Yeah. I've often said you're not ready to get a divorce until you have no unfinished emotional business. If
Right.
you're still in love but resentful, or you hate the person, or you've still got a lot of emotional energy involved, then you're not ready. You have a lot of unfinished emotional business. The time to get a divorce is when you can say, look, I've turned over every rock. I've looked under every stone. I can walk out the door and not be emotionally charged. I'm done. I'm finished. Apathy. I'm okay. I'm done. And that's certainly not where I read her being right now. And I think that's what you're saying, right?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Thank you.
All right. Well, Maggie from Alabama asked, my 18-year-old daughter had to spend spring break on the beach. I was not happy about this at all. So we have argued since this started, making my stress worse. And then I feel guilty because I can understand she wants to live her life. She's a freshman in college, and she refuses to believe how serious this is. How do I deal with her and avoid a confrontation? Well, Coach Mike, I'll let you take this one first.
Well, I think the past is the past. And at this point, it's about staying safe. The number one priority is safety at this point. And so I'm not quite sure where her daughter's at now, but it certainly seems like she's not in control of her daughter's behavior. And so unless you want to have ongoing conflict, you kind of need to let go of what she's doing.
Yeah, I think it's so important right now that we deal with the facts here. A sign of immaturity is saying, I don't want this to be true, so I'm going to pretend it isn't. The facts are what they are. The facts are you can't get exposed if you're not around somebody that has the coronavirus. You just can't get exposed. And it's not a matter, you might even say, hey, that's a risk I'm willing to take. I'm young. It's my life. I'm willing to take it. Well, that's fine for you, but here's the problem. You take that risk, but then you come home and go to the grocery store and you're standing next to an elderly person that has COPD and you infect them, their life could be at risk. You come home and get sicker than you thought you would, you're now absorbing hospital resources that could have been spent on someone that it would be life-saving for them. You don't have the right to put other people's lives in danger. Now, this can actually create life-threatening situations for other people, and you just have to deal with that.
It is frustrating. I mean, I can't imagine this mom who has a daughter who's being careless. I think it's how to redirect her daughter to actually do what's right. And what tips do you have for that, Dr. Phil, for these parents who have these kids who are...
Well, number one, stand your ground. I mean, listen, don't give in to an immature thinker. You're the one that's supposed to see around corners, Mom, Dad. You're the one that's supposed to be the compass. So just because they're throwing a tantrum or they want to do something just because they're teenagers and teenagers want what they want when they want it and they want it right now, you can't give in to that. You have to be the calm in the middle of the storm. Stand your ground, whether they like it or whether they don't. All right, coming up, while some kids are home safe, for others in the foster care system, the coronavirus is making things more difficult, and it was already a tough road. We'll talk more about that after the break. I'm answering a lot of your questions today about the coronavirus pandemic, particularly having to be isolated and quarantined for this period of time. And I want to talk about something that is concerning me today, because we have to care about those that are less fortunate than ourselves. And I'm talking about foster children. There are a lot of foster children in America. They're living in foster homes. They're living in group homes. And right now, with this pandemic, this kind of paralyzes the system, which means we have fewer families stepping up and volunteering to bring children into their home for foster care. We have a difficult time in group homes because social distancing is so important, and these homes are overcrowded unless we have the funding to get more beds in more different locations. And right now, we're having an increase in foster children entering the system and a decrease in the money involved to support these kids. Now, Dr. Charles Sophie is the medical director for the LA Child and Family Services Division, which is the largest of its kind in the entire United States. So he has his finger on this pulse. Dr. Sophie, what's happening within the system, and what can we call on people to do to help?
Well, I mean, as you can imagine, the system is really well overwhelmed to begin with, and then we have a crisis such as this. Our child abuse hotline here in Los Angeles, we get about 18,000 calls a month in general. And so now it's up to about 22 or 23 a month. And we're trying to handle them the best that we can. We're looking at which ones rise to the level of an emergency, and we go out on those. And we have to risk a worker and their life going out into a home that we don't know what's going on. There could be COVID, there's not any kind of exposure, but we have to go to those homes. That's our mandate. And then the rest of them we put on to a process where we'll see throughout the rest of the week, or we'll try to do a Skype or a FaceTime into the home to assess the safety of the child. But then we also have another problem in our group homes because our staff are on shifts and they are coming and going from these group homes. So they're exposing and re-exposing to whatever. So we're always on guard for any kinds of symptoms or new infections or anything that looks like it could be something that's going to blow up. So there's a lot of little fires going on that we got to keep our hands on.
Right. And Dr. Sophie, for example, how many cases are you having to react to on a given day, either on the phone, FaceTime, personal visits, hospital? How many of these are you having to deal with on average each day right now?
Anywhere from like 50 to 150. I'm either on the phone talking to or seeing or FaceTiming.
Okay, so you're talking 100 to 150 times you're having to engage.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
And
it's a lot.
So right now, when we have an influx of children right now, what's needed? What can people do to help?
Well, the best thing to do is you can't really volunteer your time, but you can volunteer things. We need clothes. We need coloring books, art supplies, things that are going to be like you need it in your own home to occupy your children, because there's nowhere for us to go anywhere, just like for everybody else. So things that will occupy children, board games, art supplies, cooking things, baking things, any kind of stuff like that will keep them occupied, because it's very, very difficult. We're even having a hard time getting the teachers to Skype in to teach them their lessons. So any kind of volunteering of that kind of stuff, like donations.
Okay, and how do people know what to do there? They call the child abuse hotline and ask for guidance in their community? What do they do?
Yeah, the best thing to do is call your local child abuse hotline. They will tell you where you can take supplies, where you can leave them, or if you can bring them right to the hotline and they'll distribute them. But they'll tell you, because a lot of the shelters also need supplies like blankets and slippers and pajamas and that kind of thing as well.
Okay, and you don't have to put yourself in harm's way, because you're not asking for volunteers to go into the group homes. You're just saying they need supplies, they need materials, because these children are going stir crazy, right?
Absolutely. And the staff, it's very difficult for the staff to keep them engaged, because a lot of our children have mental health issues, and trying to get the medications from the pharmacy without exposure. There's a lot of loose ends that we have to handle, and that takes our time away from the kids sometimes. So the more projects we can give them, the better. So supplies and things like that will really help.
Yeah. So moms, dad, think about your children at home right now and how much they're struggling to occupy themselves and how stir crazy they're feeling and how confined they are. And now think about a child in the same situation, but they don't have the love and support of their mother and father, or they may not have their siblings around them. So they're just sitting there completely alone, and maybe not enough food, not enough blankets to be warm, not proper shoes or clothes to wear, and nothing to occupy their time. So you really can make a difference. And maybe these are blankets you don't use. Maybe it's clothing that's been outgrown or whatever. You can put those things in a trash can liner or some kind of a bag and call your child abuse hotline and ask them where you can take what, and they'll tell you what they need. And that'll be different from city to city to city. So everybody just reach out and do that to the extent that you can. For those people that are still employed, many are asking, when does my well-being take priority? That's a good question, and I'm going to try and talk about that when we come back. The health and well-being of essential workers is of great concern to many. How do these workers do their jobs that are necessary for all of us? Protect themselves and their families in the process. Now, Amber from California asks, I'm a grocery store worker in Ventura. We are still open and operating. We try to force customers to practice social distancing, but many of them ignore us. We are constantly touching stuff on the shelves. I don't know what I am exposing myself to. I have a history of anxiety, and since this pandemic has hit our country, my anxiety is through the roof. When does my well-being take priority over being a good coworker? Do I stay and risk getting sick because I don't want to hurt someone's feelings or make them feel abandoned?
Well, I actually ran into this about 2.5 weeks ago. So I own a treatment center that's outpatient, and I had a therapist who didn't feel safe enough to come in to work because of the interaction with other clients. And so as soon as she made that decision, the whole company, we went digital. We went to completely doing telehealth for everyone's safety. And I think it really depends on what your job is. I think it's incredibly important to go to your HR director and find out what the policy is. And I also think if you're going to stay in this job, it's really important that you figure out what you need to do for your own anxiety so that you're not bringing it back home afterwards.
So many people are in jobs that you can't do digitally. Everything you can do digitally, as you say, should 100% be done digitally. But in so many jobs, there has to be somebody there to hand you the product, to give you what service that you might need. And we just have to really rely on employers to say, I am going to go that extra mile to protect my employees here. I'm going to make sure that they have their own PPE, their own personal protective equipment, where we can maintain barriers. We can put stuff at the front door for people to pick up. We can wash hands. We can wear masks. We can wear goggles. We can do everything we can. And then when those people get home, it really is worthwhile to stop in the garage, take those clothes off, put them straight into the washer, and go straight to the shower before you interact with any family members. Dr. Sophie, this virus can live on clothes, can be tracked in by shoes. It does make a difference to get out of those clothes, get them in the washer, and take a shower before you touch anyone in your family. True?
And before you even touch a doorknob, if possible. You've got to wash your hands, and you've got to really keep that hygiene going because it is very communicable. It spreads like fire, as we see. Yes.
So does it matter? If a person does stop in the garage, take those clothes off, go straight to the shower, wash their hands in the garage after they take their clothes off, can that actually make a difference? Does that help with the communicability?
100%, yes. It really cuts it way, way down. You've limited now a lot of access. So yes, the more you can do that stuff, the better. And always wash your hands. And
we
really,
have delivery people that are delivering food to a lot of people's houses now. Is the only way for a lot of them to get it sometimes. What do you recommend unpackaging that outside the house with gloves and then washing the containers inside, leaving the bags outside? How do you do that? What's your advice?
yes, that's what I've been telling people to do. Leave the bags outside, bring the containers in, wash them, and then open them and eat. But also, again, really washing your hands is key as well. And people don't know how long to wash their hands for. I tell them to sing happy birthday. The happy birthday song is the length of time pretty much that you need to be washing your hands to kill the germs that are of any threat to us.
So it's about 20 seconds.
Right.
Something like that. And
Yep.
hot soap and water is just as good as any disinfectant, true?
Yes, it is. Yes.
So you don't need something fancy, just hot soap.
You don't need, right. You don't need all the Perels and all that stuff. So hot soap and water, happy birthday to you, and you're fine.
Yeah, that's the big step, right? Okay.
Right.
All right. How best to spend your time when there is so much negativity around us? We're going to talk about that when we come back. What can we do on the positive side of things? We're past the 1 month mark in the COVID-19 pandemic, and the questions keep on increasing. People now want to know how to best spend their time. What positive projects should we all be doing to help us get through this challenging time? Now, Linda from Oregon asks, what mental exercises should one practice consistently in order to maintain a healthy and positive state? Well, let me talk about what not to do first. The one thing you don't want to do is be glued in front of the television watching coverage on the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic just around the clock. Look, there's a bias in the media, and I'm not saying that they're twisting things. I'm just saying that what makes people want to watch the news is something that is exciting, something that is breaking news, something that is out of the ordinary. So they're not going to come on and tell you how many people have recovered today. They're going to tell you how many people died today, how many new cases there are today. They're not going to focus on a hospital in Nebraska where they're meeting all the needs. They're going to focus on one in New Jersey where they're overwhelmed. And it's not that that isn't news, it is. But if it's all you watch, you can really get depressed. You can really feel like, my gosh, we're just being overwhelmed and there's not going to be anything left when we're done. So don't do that. Limit your time. Choose your sources carefully to get those that are least spun that you possibly can find. And limit your time. Check in 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes in the evening, and the rest of the time, do these positive projects that we're talking about. And the positive projects, Robin came up with a great one the other day, and I've mentioned it a couple times because it's so good. And that is photo albuming. Look, all of us, every computer, every phone, every iPad is now a camera. So we have thousands and thousands of pictures. Go through and organize those. Create albums for times, dates, events. And maybe the time will come where you want to print some of those out and give them to your grandchildren or your sister or whatever, so they have something to put on their coffee table to look at. And let me tell you, even seeing the face of a loved one when you're in isolation lowers your stress, takes away loneliness, and helps you as far as your immune system is concerned. Coach Mike, any other suggestions?
Yeah, you bring up a great point about a photo album. It's also listening to nostalgic music that of a certain area makes you feel a certain type of way. And I think what I've found with talking and working with people is defining a new structure in your life, because there is new opportunity in that. And I think it's incredibly helpful to put on a list on a piece of paper every day. This is what I'm going to do for my physical health today. It could be walking around the block. This is what I'm going to do for my spiritual health. It could be meditating or praying. This is what I'm going to do for my psychological self-help. And this is what I'm going to do by the end of the day today that's going to make me feel good. And I think having that list and checking it off for people has been really helpful in reducing anxiety.
You bet. Dr. Sophie, anything to add?
I would say that I think this is a great opportunity for people to download apps to learn how to meditate, learn how to relax, learn how to do breathing exercises, all the kinds of tools that they can kind of build their toolbox with. But also at the end of the day, dictating into your phone, into your notes area, and keeping a journal of how the day went, how you felt, how the day was for you, your children, your family. Because in 5 years, you can look back on that and it's interesting, but at least it's a way for you to daily diffuse your feelings and get them out so you can go to sleep and try to sleep soundly. And that's why I say do it at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that's so important to sleep soundly. And I've said before, if you will relax a couple of times during the day, and I don't mean chill out, but actually relax. Just tense your muscles, relax. Tense your muscles, relax. Tense your muscles, relax, like 10 times in a row. And then get your breathing regulated where it's 3 seconds in, 6 seconds out, 3 seconds in, 6 seconds out. And you do that rhythmically for at least 10 times in a row. You do that twice a day, it lasts for 8 hours. I mean, you might do it for 10 minutes, but the impact lasts for hours. So all of those things can help you mentally and emotionally. So what can you do when you have an elderly loved one and you're worried about their well-being? Now, we're going to talk about that when we come back. Well, I'm back. My guests are Dr. Charles Sophie and Coach Mike Baer. We've been answering questions from all of you today about how to maximize your experience during this isolation brought on by the pandemic. Another question coming from Connie in Tennessee says, I oversee my 100-year-old mom's care. My children and I are around her all the time, which she enjoys, but I worry that we might be compromising her health. What should we do? Well, guys, listen, there's no perfect way to do this. And clearly, if your mother is 100 years old, then she is definitely at high risk for this or any kind of infection. I mean, should she contract an infection, I have no doubt that her immune system is probably less equipped to handle it than if she was half that age. But you have to ask yourself how pure your isolation has been. I mean, are you really in self-isolation? And if you are going to the store, which is a necessity, you might need to rotate being around her. If the typical incubation the mean is 5.2 days. If you're the one that's gone to the store this week, then maybe you're not the one that's around her this week. If next week someone else goes to the store, then maybe they're not the one that's around her this week. You want to keep it as pure as you possibly can because the infection would probably have devastating effects. And let me tell you in advance, that's a likely thing to happen. And you can't blame yourself if and when it does. The CDC suggests that probably 80% of the people are eventually going to contract this virus. And despite how careful you might be, because you do have to go to the store, you do have to make essential errands, you can't be pure here. And some way it may actually have an impact and determine the outcome of her life. You don't know. All you can do is be as vigilant and as diligent as you can and weigh that against her being alone at this stage of her life. So just be as careful as you can, weigh it out, make sure that those that have been most exposed recently are not the ones around her. I wish you the best with that. Well, we're out of time. I want to thank Dr. Charles Sophie and Mike Baer for joining me today. For more information about today's show, you can log on to drphil.com. Don't forget to check me out on any of my social media outlets, including Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And while you're staying indoors, don't forget to listen to my podcast, Fill in the Blanks. You can also find Robin's podcast, I've Got a Secret. Both of them are anywhere podcasts are found, and we are keeping up with new and fresh podcasts each week. So Fill in the Blanks is there for you, and I've Got a Secret is there for you. You can find both of those, and that gives you something to keep your mind sharp and focus on while you're in isolation. We'd love to have you join us on both of those platforms. Stay safe, and we will see you next time.
Bounce, bounce, all the girlies bounce. Take 'em to my house, turn the party out. Bounce, 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 all the girlies bounce. Take 'em to my house, turn the party out.
You warned me 1,000 times, memories can kill ya, but I didn't hear ya. I thought that I could fly, but woke up on the asphalt. I swear there was the last time. I've always been naive, call it.
Ooh, you know we gon' get it. Ooh, you know we gon' get it. Ooh, you know we gon' get it. Every day, night, that's right. Ooh, you know we gon' get it.